So a lot of people are very mad about the college football playoff selection process, the G5s, what's the solution here? And to ask that question by default, it insinuates that there's a problem. In order for something to be fixed or need to be fixed, then it means there's a problem. And I'm going to tell you what is a very inconvenient truth, but it's a truth nonetheless. There is no answer for the G5. As things are currently stipulated, there is no answer for the G5. Now, you need to know this. I know I sound like your friend at the moment, and I'm going to end up sounding like your friend. It's just going to be a tough pill for a second. I love the structure we have right now more than any that we've had. If anything, I'd like to go in reverse a little bit, not forward, to a more expansive model. I like the structure we have right now. I like the exclusivity. I like that you have to jump over a lot of hurdles in order to get in this thing. I like that even the good Power 5 teams get left out most of the time. I agree with the format. I agree with the teams they put in this year. In fact, I think I've agreed with the 4 teams they've put in every single year. But, all right, now let me get friendly again. I love G5 football. I love it. I talk about it with you guys individually all the time. The videos don't do great numbers, so I don't talk about it on the show. But a lot of you can vouch for the fact that I talk all week with you guys about it in the DMs. Here's what you'll never hear me say, okay? And I want to specify this because a lot of times the wrong beliefs get thrown at people who are of my opinion. I'm of the opinion that I like 4. I like it to be extremely hard, if not impossible, for a G5 team to make it in the playoff as it's structured now, but yet I love G5 football. Those two things don't compute, right? Well, they do, but I want to tell you what I don't believe. You will never hear me say G5s are incapable of competing with P5s. Well, that's of course absurd. They do it every year. They've done it in the postseason. You will never hear me disrespect G5 teams because I have ultra high respect for them. I know coaches on G5 staffs. Like, I know what those guys go through. I know the kinds of disadvantages they face and how many obstacles in a lot of cases they overcome in the ability to compete with their Power 5 brethren sometimes. I know all that. I am uniquely aware of that. You will never hear me say I don't want them to get a shot, even though it sounds like I just did. No, I want them to get a shot. I'm just a realist about college football's postseason. I do not compare the Power 5 product to the G5. But here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying G5, P5 don't compare. Don't make that mistake. We're talking about the playoff here. We're not talking about the Music City Bowl. We're talking about the college football playoff. So in order to do that, we're comparing the top of the G5 to the top of the P5, the elites. We're not talking about Wake Forest. We're talking about Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State. The best G5 teams don't compare there. That's just reality. I got news for you. 95% of the P5 teams don't either. So before they chuckle over there, you don't have anything more in common with Alabama than Cincinnati does. In fact, Cincinnati may have a little bit more in common with them than you do at Missouri right now. So I just sit over in the corner and be quiet and let us talk about this. It's impossible to meet the minimum threshold in my mind to qualify for the current college football playoff for 99% of G5 teams. It has nothing to do with the team. It has nothing to do with whether I think they'd be good enough to compete. Please understand what I'm saying. It has, if I'm looking at Cincinnati right now or UCF in the past, it has nothing to do with whether I think if I put them on the field in a one-game situation, they could compete. I think they could, actually. So let me go that far. I think they could. It's about the challenge. It's about a minimum baseline threshold of a challenge that your schedule has to present to you that I do not think a G5 schedule presents. Let me also pause and tell you that line between G5 and P5, blurry at best right now. So I think a lot of the American Athletic Schedule conferences probably overlap and maybe even exceed at this point some of the Pac-12's schedules. So I'll probably not even say the word, or I'll probably not even use the letters and numbers Power 5 all that much longer. I think the bottom of that scale is kind of eroded a little bit. But to put a very fine, emphatical point on this and show you what I mean, I could take the Kansas City Chiefs and I could give them Cincinnati's schedule right now, and I wouldn't support them being in the college football playoff. Just to show you it has nothing to do with Cincinnati, and it has nothing to do with those teams. I don't care. I don't care what team you are. If I took Alabama and I gave them Tulsa's schedule, I wouldn't support them being in the playoff. It would have nothing to do with the quality of team. There is a minimum baseline challenge you have to have faced. If you don't face it, then you didn't put yourself in the arena through no fault of yours. It's just you didn't face it. And it's not your fault. Well, it's also not Alabama's fault or Notre Dame's fault either. How do you fix that? So some people's answer is to expand. I don't think that's the answer. Some people's thought is, well, we got to have auto bids. I don't think that's the answer. So my answer has always been a G5 playoff. Some people push back on that. Some people think it's a good idea. I'd love to see it. I ask, why is there pushback? A G5 playoff, you can model it and structure it exactly how the Power Five is currently structured. For the folks who push back on that, I just ask this question. What are you pushing back on? Because if the entire basis for your argument is G5 programs belong in this conversation because they are comparable to the P5, because they can compete with the P5, well then by default, your product should be just as good. It should be a standalone product. If you have your own playoff over here, it should carry just as much weight. It should be standalone in nature. People should be interested enough to watch. Therefore, it's going to have intrinsic value. What about this is not true, unless you don't really believe in the points you're making? Now, I think it would succeed. I think it'd be a big hit. But you think right now the Power Five structure is screwing you, and you're partially right about that. You think it's very exclusive and it's not allowing you at the table. You're very much right about that. So how about a model wherein, number one, you have full autonomy. Number two, you get everything that you're asking for. You get a seat. You get equality. Everyone gets a shot. And number three, it's fair. It's decided fair. Things aren't fair right now. So you need, if I were in a situation where it was untenable and I could get away from the current situation and start my own, I'd go start my own. That's what I would do. You can remain angry, though. Like, you can disagree with me. I know a lot of you right now are disagreeing, and that's fine. It's just college football at the end of the day. But I want to ask you, who are you really angry at? You angry at the college football playoff? You angry at people like me who like the current model? If you are, why? Because I didn't make this thing. And the folks who did make this thing, I don't necessarily think are the folks you think they are. You think it's an ESPN deal. You think there's this big bad wolf that's a big broadcast monster and it's all fixed, and you may be half right about that. In fact, you may be mostly right about that. But let me ask you something. Have you heard G5 commissioners speak out against this thing? Really speak out against it. Not recite talking points like a politician does when you know behind the scenes they're sitting there rubbing their hands together. No. I mean, has there been any actionable move by a G5 conference commissioner to overturn this, to revolt, to rebel against it? The answer is no. Do you know why? Let me once again fill you in on this little secret. The entire reason the college football playoff exists is because everyone signed off on it. Current format, current structure, current way it's decided. Yeah, the Power Five conference commissioners, they had no problem signing off on it. But you know which other signatures are on that contract? The signatures of G5 commissioners. And so just as sure as they walk to a podium and with a microphone in front of their face, they scream outrage, they're in the back room back here counting money. They need it. They need it. They did the same thing I would do. They need it. But how are you going to fix it? Because you can argue the college football playoff has hurt the sport, and you could argue all that, but I'm just telling you, it's not fixable. That's the whole point. It's not fixable. You're going to have problems no matter what you do, because if you split off over here, you're going to have a revenue problem. If you stay here where you're kind of subsidized, you're going to have an inclusion problem. You're always going to have a problem. But I want to address a couple of more points that people are making today, and then we'll move on. A lot of points people are making today have something to do with one of the two bullet points mainly. There are many folks who believe that the college football playoff has hurt the sport because now only a few teams can really compete for a national title. You are right, partially. Only a few teams can compete for the national title right now. Why can only a few teams? Why is Bama there every year? Why is Clemson there every year? Are you suggesting to me that the college football playoff did something to put those teams in perennial position to compete for a championship? Because I don't think that's the case at all. I told you the other day on the show, what I think has happened is that there were a few programs who had themselves in the right position, and there was a massive, over the past decade and a half to 2 decades, there has been a massive infusion of TV cash into this sport. That's before even the college football playoff contract came into the room. It's now here and here to stay, but there was a massive influx of new TV cash into the room long before the college football playoff came around, and there were programs that were structured the right way. They were built on a firm foundation, and then when the money came in the room, the ones who were doing it the right way they built high rises. And the ones who were doing it the wrong way, it didn't matter because they were building on sand, so it was going to keep collapsing on them. And it didn't matter how much money they kept throwing at the problem, they didn't have the foundation built right. But there were a few programs. Saban's Alabama is one of them. Dabo's Clemson is one of them. Urban Meyer and now Ryan Day's Ohio State was one of them. Lincoln Riley and Bob Stoops even before him. That Oklahoma program was one of them. Those high rises started to go up really quickly. It's like New York in the late 70s, early 80s. May have been the mafia running things, but those high rises were going up really quickly. So you started to see some separation really quickly. And there was this other thing happening too. It was a very, very quick offensive evolution to where the quarterback position, which has always been the most important position, it became really, really important. Never has the game hinged on quarterback play like it does if you've got a Trevor Lawrence now, or a Tua Tagovailoa, or a Kyle Trask, or a Mac Jones. That one person, that one dude is the difference in your entire fortune. And then when one of them leaves, you have another one come in. And it's a cycle, but it's a cycle that had to start somewhere. Where did it start? And if you're telling me the playoffs started it, well, I ask you, how in the world did LSU do what they did last year? LSU was not close to being in the playoff until they were. And what did they do? Well, they had an athletic structure that got Scott Woodward in there as the athletic director, and he had very barely been there when they won the title, I understand that, but they had a good roster there, and the right quarterback walked in Joe Burrow. And they had everything come together, as has to happen to win a title. And there's nothing about the college football playoff that propelled LSU. LSU propelled LSU. And if you don't think there are not another dozen programs at the very, very least in major college football capable of doing that, you're crazy. The problem, as we all know, if you really step back and think about this, is it's much easier for folks associated with failing football programs to look at you and say, guys, what can we do? The playoffs keeping us out. It's a lot easier to say that than for them to say, guys, we suck and we have no clue how to run an athletic department. And we really, if we could get out of our own way, we could be successful. That is the current plight of the University of Tennessee. That is the current plight of the University of Texas. The playoff is not keeping those teams out. Those teams are keeping those teams out. And then the other argument that I had made to me probably 100 times today is, well, at the very least, we need auto bids to make conference championships matter again. Because these games get really boring and no one cares about them. No, that's not the case at all. You may not care about them. We care about them a great deal. In fact, if you can think back to either the Late Kick podcast or Late Kick Live, which we're doing right now, and Colin can attest to this. Colin, I don't think I've had you make a single playoff projection graphic the entire year. When we talk about Oregon, in September and October and November, we talk about them within the context of making the Pac-12 championship game. When we talk about Georgia, we talk about them making it to Atlanta. In the Big 12, we talk about teams making it to the Big 12 championship game. That's because we still revolve our thinking around a conference championship structure. We still think in terms of conference. And I have suggested to you, and I will continue to suggest to you, you decide what you care about. You decide what you place value on. The college football playoff is nebulous. It's there, but we don't even talk about it until right before the playoff happens. This is our second college football playoff topic of the entire season this year. We've done several conference topics. Second playoff topic. The college football playoff is not hurting college football nearly as much as the way the sport is covered is hurting college football. That's why we intentionally do it different around here than I see it done elsewhere. I tweeted out earlier today, I don't even watch college football studio coverage. I never see it. I hear you guys complain all the time, and you tell me one of the reasons you watch Late Kick is because we don't do it the way the other guys do, and that part is intentional. But I exposed myself to a little bit of it this morning. It doesn't shock me at all that a growing amount of people don't care about the conference championship. You got playoff propaganda being thrown at you from August on. Well, if you're told that's what matters and you don't detach yourself from it, like I've been thankfully wise enough to do, well, then you get convinced the only thing that matters is college football playoff. Well, that's not the case. And you have the power as to whether you think that's the case or not.